Good evening, and welcome to Restored Lore, your home for old, odd, and obscure stories. Tonight will be a bit lighter and more playful, with a story with a title that I cannot possibly pronounce correctly. It's The Adventures of Gilla, Chreck, and Gour by Patrick Kennedy. This version was published in The Irish Fairy Book in 1909. To anticipate some later confusion, Gilla, Chreck, and Gour means something like the lad wearing the goatskin. This lad is an apocryphal figure who appears in a ton of Irish and Northern European folktales. In this particular tale, the lad's name is Tom, so he is sometimes referred to as Tom or as Gilla, the lad. Now, let's open our imaginations and begin. Long ago, a poor widow woman lived down by the iron forge near Enniscorthy, and she was so poor she had no clothes to put on her son. So she used to fix him in the ash hole near the fire and pile the warm ashes about him, and accordingly, as he grew up, she sunk the pit deeper. At last, by hook or by crook, she got a goatskin and fastened it round his waist, and he felt quite grand and took a walk down the street. So says she to him next morning, "Tom, you thief, you never done any good yet, and 6 foot high and past 19. Take that rope and bring me a bresna from the wood." "Never say twice, mother," says Tom. "Here goes." When he had it gathered and tied, what should come up but a big giant, 9 foot high, and made a lick of a club at him. Well become Tom, he had jumped to one side and picked up a rampike, and the first crack he gave the big fella he made him kiss the clod. "If you e'er have a prayer," says Tom, "now's the time to say it before I make brisha of you." "I have no prayers," says the giant, "but if you'll spare my life, I'll give you that club, and as long as you keep from sin, you'll win every battle you ever fight with it." Tom made no bones about letting him off, and as soon as he got the club on his hands, he sat down on the bresna and gave it a tap with the capeen, and says, "Bresna, I had a great trouble gathering you, and run the risk of my life for you. The least you can do is carry me home." And sure enough, the wind of the word was all it wanted. It went off through the wood, groaning and cracking till it came to the widow's door. Well, when the sticks were all burned, Tom was sent off again to pick more, and this time he had to fight with a giant with 2 heads on him. Tom had a little more trouble with him, that's all, and the prayers he said was to give Tom a fife that nobody could help dancing when he was playing it. Begonies, he made the big bresna dance home with himself sitting on it. If you were to count all the steps from this to Dublin, Dickens a bit you'd ever arrive there. The next giant was a beautiful boy with 3 heads on him. He had neither prayers nor catechism nor more the others, and he gave Tom a bottle of green ointment that wouldn't let him be burned, nor scalded, nor wounded. "And now," says he, "there's no more of us. You may come and gather sticks here till lunacy day and harvest without giant or ferryman to disturb you." Well, now, Tom was prouder nor 10 paycocks, and used to take a walk down the street in the heel of the evening, but some of the little boys had no more manners nor if they were Dublin jackeens, and put out their tongues at Tom's club and Tom's goatskin. He didn't like that at all, and it would be mean to give one of them a clout. At last, what should come through the town but a kind of bellman, only it's a big bugle he had, and a huntsman's cap on his head, and a kind of a painted shirt. So this, he wasn't a bellman, so I don't know what to call him, bugleman maybe, proclaimed that the King of Dublin's daughter was so melancholy that she didn't give a laugh for 7 years, and that her father would grant her in marriage to whoever would make her laugh 3 times. "That's the very thing for me to try," says Tom, and so, without burning any more daylight, he kissed his mother, curled his club at the little boys, and set off along the yellow high road to the town of Dublin. At last Tom came to one of the city gates, and the guards laughed and cursed at him instead of letting him through. Tom stood it all for a little time, but at last one of them, out of fun, as he said, drove his bayonet half an inch or so into his side. Tom did nothing but take the fellow by the scruff of his neck and the waistband of his corduroys and fling him into the canal. Some ran to pull the fellow out, and others to let manners into the vulgarian with their swords and daggers, but a tap from his club sent them headlong into the moat or down into the stones, and they were soon begging him to stay his hands. So at last one of them was glad enough to show Tom the way to the palace yard, and there was the king and queen and the princess in a gallery, looking at all sorts of wrestling and sword playing and rincafadas, long dances, and mumming, all to please the princess, but not a smile came over her handsome face. Well, they all stopped when they seen the young giant, with his boy's face and long black hair, and his short curly beard, for his poor mother couldn't afford to buy razors, and his great strong arms and bare legs, and no covering but the goatskin that reached from his waist to his knees. But an envious wizard bastard of a fellow with a red head that wished to be married to the princess, and didn't like how she opened her eyes at Tom, came forward and asked his business very snappishly. "My business," says Tom, says he, "is to make the beautiful princess, God bless her, laugh 3 times. "Do you see all them merry fellas and skilful swordsmen," says the other, "that could eat you up with a grain of salt, and not a mother's soul of 'em ever got a laugh from her these 7 years? So the fellows gathered around Tom, and the bad man aggravated him till he told him he didn't care a pinch of snuff for the whole biling of 'em, let 'em come on 6 at a time and try what they could do. The king, that was too far off to hear what they were saying, asked what did the stranger want. "He wants," says the red-headed fella, "to make hares of your best men." "Ho, ho," says the king, "if that's the way, let one of 'em turn out and try his mettle." So one strode forward with sword and pot-lid and made a cut at Tom. He struck the fellow's elbow with the club, and up over their heads flew the sword, and down went the owner of it on the gravel from a thump he got on the helmet. Another took his place, and another, and then half a dozen at once, and Tom sent swords, helmets, shields, and bodies rolling over and over and over, and themselves bawling out that they were killed and disabled and damaged, and rubbing their poor elbows and hips and limping away. Tom contrived not to kill anyone, and the princess was so amused she let out a great sweet laugh out of her that was heard all over the yard. "King of Dublin," says Tom, "I've a quarter of your daughter." And the king didn't know whether he was glad or sorry, and all the blood in the princess's heart ran to her cheeks. So there was no more fighting that day, and Tom was invited to dine with the royal family. Next day, Redhead told Tom of a wolf the size of a yearling heifer that used to be serenading about the walls and eating people and cattle, and said what a pleasure it would give the king to have it killed. "With all my heart," says Tom. "Send a Jackeen to show me where he lives, and we'll see how he behaves to a stranger." The princess was not well pleased, for Tom looked a different person with fine clothes and a nice green bird over his long curly hair, and besides, he'd got one laugh out of her. However, the king gave his consent, and in an hour and a half the horrible wolf was walking in the palace yard, and Tom a step or 2 behind with his club on his shoulder, just as a shepherd would be walking after a pet lamb. The king and queen and princess were safe up in their gallery, but the officers and people of the court that were patrolling about the great bawn, when they saw the big beast coming in, gave themselves up and began to make for doors and gates, and the wolf licked his chops as if he was saying, "Wouldn't I enjoy a breakfast off a couple of you?" The king shouted out, "Oh, Gilla na Chreck and Gour, take away that terrible wolf, and you must have all my daughter." But Tom didn't mind him a bit. He pulled out his flute and began to play like vengeance, and dickens a man or boy in the yard but began shovelling away heel and toe, and the wolf himself was obliged to get on his hind legs and dance Tather Jack Walsh along with the rest. A good deal of the people got inside and shut the doors, the way the hairy fellow wouldn't pin them, but Tom kept playing, and the outsiders kept shouting and dancing, and the wolf kept dancing and roaring with the pain his legs were giving him, and all the time he had his eyes on Redhead, who was shut out along with the rest. Wherever Redhead went, the wolf followed, and kept one eye on him and the other on Tom, to see if he would give him leave to eat him. But Tom shook his head and never stopped the tune, and Redhead never stopped dancing and bawling, and the wolf dancing and roaring, one leg up and the other down, and he ready to drop out of his standing from their tiresomeness. When the princess seen that there was no fear of anyone being killed, she was so diverted by the stew that Redhead was in that she gave another great laugh, and well become Tom, out he cried, "King of Dublin, I have 2 quarters of your daughter." "Oh, quarters are alls," said the king. "Put away that devil of a wolf and we'll see about it." So Gilla put his flute in his pocket, and says he to the baste that was sitting on his curbingo ready to faint, "Walk off to your mountains, my fine fella, and live like a respectable baste, and if ever I find you come within 7 miles of any town—" He said no more, but spit in his fist and gave a flourish of his club. It was all the poor devil wanted. He put his tail between his legs and took his pumps without looking at a man nor mortal, and neither sun, moon, nor stars ever saw him in sight of Dublin again. At dinner everyone laughed but the foxy fellow, and, sure enough, he was laying out how he'd settle poor Tom next day. "Well, to be sure," says he, "King of Dublin, you are in luck. There's the Danes murdering us to no end, damn run to Lasquidham, and if anyone can save us from 'em, it is this gentleman with the goatskin. There's a flail hanging on the collar beam in hell, and neither Dane nor devil can stand before it." "So," says Tom to the king, "will you let me have the other half of the princess if I bring you the flail?" "No, no," says the princess. "I'd rather never be your wife than to see you in that danger." But Redhead whispered and nudged Tom about how shabby it would look to renege on the adventure. So he asked him which way he was to go, and Redhead directed him through a street where a great many bad women lived, and a great many shebeen houses were open, and away he set. Well, he travelled and he travelled till he came in sight of the walls of hell, and bedad, before he knocked at the gates, he rubbed himself over with the greenish ointment. When he knocked, 100 little imps popped their heads out through the bars and asked him what he wanted. "I wanted to speak to the big devil of all," says Tom. "Open the gate." It wasn't long till the gate was thrown open, and the old boy received Tom with bows and scrapes and asked his business. "My business isn't much," says Tom. "I only come for the loan of that flail that I see hanging on the collar beam for the King of Dublin to give a thrashing to the Danes." "Well," says the other, "the Danes is much better customers to me, but since you walked so far, I won't refuse. Hand that flail," says he to a young imp, and he winked the far-off eye at the same time. So, while some were barring the gates, the young devil climbed up and took down the iron flail that had the hand staff and boolteen both made out of red-hot iron. The little vagabond was grinning to think how it would burn the hands off of Tom, but the dickens a burn it made on him, no more nor if it was a good oak sapling. "Thank ye," says Tom. "Now, would you open the gate for a body, and I'll give you no more trouble." "Oh, tramp," says old Nick. "Is that the way? It is easier getting inside them gates than getting out again. Take that tool from him and give him a dose of the oil of stirrup." So one fellow put out his claws to seize on the flail, but Tom gave him such a welt of it on the side of his head that he broke off one of his horns and made him roar like the devil as he was. Well, they rushed at Tom, but he gave them, little and big, such a thrashing as they didn't forget for a while. At last says the old thief of all, rubbing his elbows, "Let the fool out, and woe to whoever lets him in again, great or small." So Out marched Tom, and away with him, without minding the shouting and cursing they kept up at him from the tops of the walls. And when he got home to the big bawn of the palace, there never was such a running and racing to see himself and the flail. When he had his story told, he laid down the flail on the stone steps and bid no one for their lives to touch it. If the king and queen and princess made much of him before, they made 10 times as much of him now. But Redhead, the mean scruff hound, stole over and thought to catch hold of the flail to make an end of him. His fingers hardly touched it when he let a roar out of him as if heaven and earth were coming together, and kept flinging his arms about and dancing that it was pitiful to look at him. Tom ran at him as soon as he could rise, caught his hands in his own too, and rubbed them this way and that, and the burning pain left them before you could reckon one. Well, the poor fellow, between this pain that was only just gone and the comfort he was in, had the comicalest face that ever you see. It was such a mixerum-gatherum of laughing and crying. Everyone burst out a-laughing. The princess could not stop no more so than the rest. And then says Gilla, or Tom, "Now, ma'am, if there were 50 halves of you, I hope you'll give me them all." Well, the princess had no mock modesty about her. She looked at her father, and, by my word, she came over to Gilla and put her 2 delicate hands into his 2 rough ones, and I wish it was myself was in his shoes that day. Tom would not bring the flail into the palace. You may be sure no other body went near it, and when the early risers were passing next morning, they found 2 long clefts in the stone where it was, after burning itself and opening downwards, and nobody could tell how far. But a messenger came in at noon and said that the Danes were so frightened when they heard of the flail coming into Dublin that they got into their ships and sailed away. Well, I suppose before they were married, Gilla got some man like Pat Morra of Tomanine to learn him the principles of politeness, fluxions, gunnery, fortifications, decimal fractions, practice, and the rule of 3 direct. That way he'd be able to keep up a conversation with the royal family. Whether he ever lost his time learning these sciences, I'm not sure, but it's sure as fate that his mother never more saw any want till the end of her days. This is one more story about some rustic country boy winning the heart of the princess. And also, over time, we're getting quite an interesting picture of the King of Dublin, who manages to be fine and fancy, but also very relatable and agreeable. In the stories we've read on the channel so far, there's never a sense of awe or majesty about him, but there is often a sense of awe and majesty about the high kings and the old heroes of Ireland. I love how the princess genuinely likes Tom in this story, and she goes to him willingly. She has personality, she has agency, she chooses her man. And although this is a short story, Tom's adventures are so wide-ranging. He fights some giants, and then the wolf, and then the devil himself, and each battle has a little scene and some dialogue and some character building. It's very well done. Perhaps he would have gone on to fight the Danes too, if necessary. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are a lot of stories about a lad in a goat skin all over Northern Europe. Generally speaking, in Ireland they have 2 main variations. One variation of the lad with the goat skin is that he is a poor country boy, and his mother dresses him in a goat skin, and somehow he also has supernatural strength, and he has a bunch of adventures and emerges victorious. In another version of these type of stories, there's a hero or a prince or somebody who wears a goat skin and gives his name as the lad in the goat skin in order to conceal his identity for various reasons, while he, of course, has a different kind of adventure. In this particular story, Gilla is also an ash lad, which is a motif borrowed from Nordic mythology. In Nordic mythology, an ash lad or cinder boy is a person who is too small or frail or useless to do anything but stay at home and blow on the embers and keep the fire going. It is a job usually reserved for the very young or very old members of the family who are too weak and frail to do anything else. Typically, the ash lad who doesn't have strength or great prospects, but by virtue of patience and cleverness has some kind of great success, and he often wins the princess and the kingdom. Interestingly, there are parallels with the Three Sons stories where the youngest son is always the one who finally emerges victorious. I think just about every Danish story we've had on this channel so far has used that formula. I thought that this and other convergences between Celtic and Nordic folklore are super interesting, especially because this story explicitly mentions the war with the Danes. So, I thought I would pop over and learn a little bit of history and talk about the Celts and the Danes, but you guys, this is not a little history. This is centuries of absolutely epic history, eventually involving the peak of Viking power against the last majesty of the High Kings at Tara in Ireland. There is no way I could do it justice. But I did incidentally learn about a crazy period of time in the late 1600s when, for absolutely bizarre reasons, the King of Denmark joined the King of the Netherlands in order to fight against the Jacobites in Ireland because of those weird few years when the King of the Netherlands was also the King of England. Which brings us back again to the Battle of the Boyne, which I'm sure I've mentioned before on this channel. People forget how intertwined the history of the UK is with the history of the Netherlands, seriously. But I do think the Dutch kind of like to lay low like that. If you listen all the way to the end of the video, you'll get to hear me make a little confession. Tonight's confession is a silly one, which is that I am more and more into trinket trays. Firstly, trinket trays are easy to find at thrift shops and whatnot, and they're very affordable. You can easily just use pretty platters or cool old ashtrays or whatever as a trinket tray. They're also super easy to make out of like air dry clay or just varnished and laminated decorated cardboard, or you can just reverse decoupage onto plastic. You get so many clear plastic tray-like things in food packaging, like the stuff they package cookies in, or sliced meat in, or fresh fruit in, and it's very easy to decoupage on the underside, so the top side is pretty, but also has the durability and water resistance of plastic. Then you just put some little feet on the bottom and you're set. But here's the thing. There's not one thing that sits on another thing anywhere that doesn't look better with some kind of tray underneath it. All my dumb seashells on the corner of the bookshelf, trinket tray. All the little plants on the windowsill, trinket tray. All my face products or fragrances on the bathroom counter, trinket tray and trinket tray. Somehow putting things onto a little tray or a stand or a dish kind of elevates them and it makes everything look more intentional. It also makes it easier to clean or dust surfaces because you can just move the tray. This is, by the way, why you always use trays and never doilies. Doilies are old-fashioned and trinket trays are modern. The funniest implementation of this principle in my life so far is that all of my bathing products are on a tray. The tray goes into a cabinet when it's not in use, and then the whole tray comes out when I bathe or shower. That keeps all the clutter of those products kind of tucked away out of sight when they're not in use. And it also lends this weird formality to my grooming habits. It's like I'm my own butler. I'm kind of laying out the towels and I'm placing the tray of bottles and whatnot. I'm turning on the music. It's all so funny and formal. But if you haven't yet, consider containing your clutter on a tea tray or a nice platter or something. It really does make a huge difference. I have a small stack of in-progress trays that I'm going to go work on right now, which is why it's top of mind. If you like trinket trays and goatskin boys, what other channel can meet your needs? Only this one. Subscribe and enable notifications so you never miss a story. Please also drop me a comment below and tell me your latest decor obsession or your DIY project, or just drop a like on the video to boost me in the algorithm. Finally, if you want to support me even further, consider buying me a coffee using the link below. Thank you so much, and I will see you in a few days.